My name is Chloe Garcia Roberts. I am a lecturer in poetry and the curator of CMSW's William Corbett Poetry Series. Welcome to our reading for the 2025-2026 school year, co-sponsored by SHAS, Lit, ACT departments, and the MIT Press Bookstore. I'd like to ask everyone to take a moment to silence their cell phones. The poet William Corbett, whom this series is named after, it's standing room only, but you are free to stand, taught poetry here at MIT for over 2 decades. I knew him tangentially, but even from our limited interactions, I was aware of his 2 great loves, poetry and MIT. He dedicated his life to creating community, support, and literary conviviality, both on campus and off. I myself am new to MIT, but find resonance in these loves. Poetry has a unique and long-standing place here at MIT, and I have been enchanted by that surprising discovery. The students I have taught here have taught me that this is a place of discovering and recognizing patterns everywhere we look. And this work fits hand in glove with the work of poetry, which is articulating and building patterns out of everything we see. In the spirit, then, of this place and the namesake of this series, I would like to open this evening of origin stories with a pattern. The poet that we are welcoming here to read tonight, the Poet Laureate of the United States, was once a student here. And after leaving on his poetic quest, he settled in Santa Fe, and among other things, started a Poets in the Schools program there, hiring a small army of poets to go out and teach children in the public schools about the art. One of those poets came into my 5th grade classroom in Tusuki, New Mexico, and changed the trajectory of my life, so that I find myself, amazingly, here tonight, welcoming him back and recognizing his connection to this place. Sometimes life is beautifully symmetrical, sometimes life rhymes. It is my pleasure to welcome Professor Nick Montfort to the podium, a poet, a professor of digital media, and my colleague in teaching advanced poetry for the CMSW department.
Thank you. Don't go, because Chloe is just starting to curate this William Corbett poetry series, and what a start it is. Please give her some appreciation for her work. Thanks very much. Happy National Poetry Month. I'm going to start with a little bit about Arthur Se's formation as a poet, and a note about how we are not just welcoming him, but we're welcoming him back. He came to MIT as an undergraduate in 1968. Sze told the tech about his pivotal experience in 1802, his first year. It was called 1802. Okay, even still, yes. There were all these equations up on a huge whiteboard. I suddenly just turned away. I flipped to the back of my notebook and I started writing phrases. The phrases, fragments, images were inspired by this painting by Modigliani. The tech didn't leave the next part out, but I liked the way that Sze put it in an interview with NPR. I could feel a thrill of language that I think was latent there. So it kind of erupted. By the way, if you get bored during the reading, it's not appropriate to do your 1802 problem set, okay? Just want to let you know. To go on with Arthur Se's statements to NPR, he said, a year later, I'm starting my sophomore year, telling my parents, guess what? I'm going to leave MIT, transfer to UC Berkeley, and pursue poetry. Now, unlikely as it might seem to you all, or your parents, this was a good move. Sze developed a career as a poet as well as a translator and editor, publishing to date 12 books of poetry. I won't enumerate these and keep you from his reading by doing so, but I won't even list all the prize-winning ones, but his most recent is Into the Hush. In 2019, Sightlines earned him a National Book Award. Compass Rose was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. Sze is also the recipient of the 2025 Bollingen Prize for American Poetry for Lifetime Achievement, the 2022 Ruth Lilly Poetry Prize, the Shelley Memorial Award, the Jackson Poetry Prize, a Lannan Literary Award, a Guggenheim Fellowship, and 2 NEA Fellowships, just to mention some selected honors. Not only is he a translator, his work has been translated into 15 languages. He served as Chancellor of the Academy of American Poets, and I have to note that his current responsibilities as Poet Laureate of the United States don't seem to have slowed him down. I recently opened the latest issue of the Michigan Quarterly Review to be greeted by 2 wonderful poems of his. Arthur Sze lives in Santa Fe and is Professor Emeritus at the Institute of American Indian Arts. So rather than tell you what he writes about or the styles and forms he engages with, I'll simply name one quality of his work that I hope will help prepare you for what's to come. It's the extraordinary range, sometimes with the same poem oscillating from sudden violence to piercing intimacy, moving from the deeply personal to the cultural, to the ecological, to the abstract and universal. As to the specifics of how this happens, you'll hear that soon enough. Please join me in warmly welcoming back Arthur Sze.
So I'm going to give an unconventional reading this evening because I wanted to intersperse and share with you what it was like writing my first poems at MIT years ago, in between reading my own poems. And I'm going to start by reading 3 poems from my latest book, Into the Hush. The first poem is called Anvil. When a black butterfly flits past, when you glimpse the outlines of apple trees, when you smell the sprig of sunrise and walk up to the ditch, when bearing Aleut, Juma, Tuscarora join the list of vanished languages, when you turn a spigot and irrigate blossoming pear trees, when the time of your life is a time of earthquakes, when a woman hit by a car while crossing the street recovers, then slides into pain, when a matsutake emerges out of the rubble of Hiroshima, when a bartender blows smoke rings and slips through hoops into his past, when foragers slice ruchulas, amanitas, clitosebes, and pursue red-capped boletes, when water slips through roots, rises through a trunk, streams into leaves, when in our bodies we sway and flood, when you bloody your hands, when the mind like this earth is struck and tilts its axis, when under summer stars you have built a cabin in the wilderness, when you gaze at Aldebaran and sense a first frost on the grass, when in our bodies we ride the waves of our earth, here is the anvil on which to hammer your days. I'm picking periodically poems with a lot of science in them. I figure this is a chance to converge poetry and science, and this next poem is called Vectors. First extinction in the Galapagos Islands, the least vermilion flycatcher. Hopis drill a foot deep and plant blue corn along a wash. Danger, a woman brushed on the side of a napalm bomb. In an oblong box emptied of firewood, a black widow web. Shaving, he nicked himself and stared in the mirror in a moment of blood. Out of a saddlebag, a teen pulls a severed goat's head. Before signing his name, he recalls hotel rooms were once used as torture chambers. In Thessaloniki, the beach attendant made a gun of his hand and fired at him. Prisoners cackled when the inmate on stage said, "Is it not time for my painkiller?" Weighing mushrooms, the Tibetan cashier grins. You suffer from suspicion. I suffer from kindness. A mercenary turned car mechanic spilled a pile of Krugerrands onto the table. Looking up from a tusk under the lamp, the carver smiled. It's butter in my hands. And this third poem's a very different kind of a poem. It's in the voice of a jaguar. I've written a series of, they're basically monologues in the voice of creatures. So I have one piece called Lichen Song, another called Salt Song, and this particular piece, Jaguar Song. Just after you sign and envision building homes on this tract, you smell me in the dark. Know that I move through this terrain at night, though you only think of building and selling. Even now you believe you can borrow my spirit by wearing a mask of my face on your face. Look at me. Delve into your fears. Is your deepest fear to be hacked, strangled, or be strapped to an IV in a bed with no chance to die? I can grasp a turtle and break its shell with one bite. I can pounce on a deer and crush its skull and neck with my teeth. You slash and burn in the jungle. Force the snakes and macaws to retreat. You even burn your own species alive. Look into my eyes. I am your mirror and transformer. If you destroy my species, I will shapeshift and hunt you in your dreams. The fingerprints of your hands resemble the black rosettes on my skin, and you will not escape. You will never comprehend the twin nights in my eyes. Remember, as a child, you came up the steps from the basement and flicking off the light at the top of the stairs, feared a hand about to grasp your shoulder from behind. That fear is alive. And now as you rummage for keys at your apartment doorstep, I am a passing jogger about to pounce. I am the creature who smells your darkest thoughts. And as you turn the key in the lock day or night, out of the darkness I spring. So thank you. Those are 3 poems from my latest book, Into the Hush. And as I said, I want to sort of weave back and forth. I want to come back to 1968, when I wrote my first poem in that calculus lecture, and I was writing another poem and another poem and another poem, and I knew that that's what I wanted to do. You can imagine what it was like as an Asian American going back to my family saying, I know you wanted me to be a scientist or engineer. My father got his PhD from MIT in chemical engineering, and he was hoping I would sort of follow in his footsteps. And I said, instead, I'm going to transfer to UC Berkeley and pursue poetry. He thought I'd gone crazy. But in 1969, I'd been writing for about a year, and I saw that a visiting poet, Denise Levertov, was coming to MIT. And she asked students to submit, I think, 6 or 8 poems, and then she chose a group of students. And it was a combined MIT and Harvard class. I think there were 7 students from MIT, 5 from Harvard, Radcliffe. There was someone who just lived in Cambridge. It was a sort of unusual group of students, and Denise lived in East Boston. She didn't want to teach on campus. She wanted to have the 3-hour classes in her apartment at her home, and so she would sort of make food, and we would have these marathon poetry sessions once a week. And I think one of the things I learned from Denise was not just sound, but an attention to silence. Isaac Stern, the violinist, was once asked, how do you know when a violin performance is going really well? And instead of saying, oh, you know, by the string of notes, he said, I know it by the quality of silences. And Denise was trained as a dancer. She didn't go to college, but that physicality of language and motion, and she was always, I remember, obsessed with line breaks, lineation, using the space of the page. And I remember once her saying, well, a line break is equivalent to half a comma, and a half a comma is less than a period. And I thought, well, wait a minute, you know, you've got a period, a semicolon, a dash. How can you choreograph silences like that? But not that we ever came to any agreement about that, but it did make me think about the motion of silence as well as sound and rhythm. And in those first 2 poems that I read, it's kind of my invented form. It's a series of what I call monostichs, 1-line stanzas, each ending in a dash and each one having its own kind of microcosm and world. And so multiple worlds can be brought together. I'm going to, let's see, read from the Glass Constellation. And I think it was Auden who said, above all else, a poet is passionate about language. And this poem starts with 2 words from the Hopi language. And there are male and female languages in the Hopi language. Parallax. Kwa asquali. The shift in Hopi when a man or woman says thank you becomes a form of parallax. A man travels from Mindanao to Kyushu and says his inner geography is enlarged by each new place. Is it? Might he not grow more by staring for 24 hours at a single pine needle? I watch a woman tip an ashtray and empty a few ashes into her mouth. But I want other soliloquies. I want equivalents to Zhuge Liang sending his fire ships downstream into Cao Cao's fleet. It does not mean a geneticist must quit and devote his life to the preservation of rhinoceros, but it might mean watching 1,000 snow geese drift on water as the sky darkens minute by minute. Kwa asquali, whenever, wherever. Thank you. This next poem is called Kayaking at Night on Tamales Bay. And I'm going to make a little preface to this and the next few set of poems. When I worked as a poet in the schools in New Mexico from 1974 to 84, the woman who worked for the State Arts Council, Helene Slansky, used to have these dinners. And her husband, Richard Slansky, was the head of the T division, the theoretical physics division at Los Alamos National Laboratory. So when I left MIT and went west to Berkeley, and I was studying classical Chinese and translating ancient Chinese poetry into English, I thought, well, I'm leaving science behind. But lo and behold, the sort of rigor of science and my training became valuable to me as a poet. And I remember one evening talking to Richard Slansky about string theory. I don't know, maybe that's now relegated to the dustbins of history. I don't know, but I remember Dick telling me that he was working on 10-dimensional space and math and string theory. And I thought, I have no idea what that is, but I can use that in a poem. Kayaking at night on Tamales Bay. Kayak on the black water and feel a gold feather float in the air. Pick up a red shard in the dirt and feel someone light a candle and sing. A man may die crashing into a redwood house or die as someone pries open an oyster. A kayaker may hit a rock and drown at the bottom of a waterfall. Is the world of the dead a world of memory or a world of 10 dimensions? Calculate the number of configurations to a tangram. Compute the digits of pi. Kayak on the black water and feel the moonlight glisten the pines. Drift, drift, and drifting. The lights of cars on the road take 1,000 years to arrive. And this next poem is inspired by two renowned physicists who probably need no introduction here, but again, through these dinners in Santa Fe, New Mexico, in the most unlikely of circumstances, I became very good friends with the Nobel laureate Murray Gell-Mann and the second particle physicist who also discovered the quark, George Zweig. And we would have these wonderful conversations about the cosmos, really. And I guess I want to say that although the languages of math and science may seem so different from poetry, with George and Murray, there was such a deep sense of wonder and surprise and a recognition of mystery. It was really very, very wonderful for me. And I'm going to read a sequence of 6 poems. It was, for me, really important in my evolution, where I'd been translating ancient Chinese poems and wanted to write a poem that was complete in like 18 to 20 lines. And then I got to the stage where I felt like I needed to break that apart to create something longer with different tonalities, different shifts of place and time. And I remember writing this poem, and I showed it to Murray Gell-Mann, and a few weeks later, to my surprise, he called me one evening, and he said, "Arthur, I'm writing a book on simplicity and complexity. You have the images, I have the ideas." And Murray said, "I cannot come up with the images, but you have a phrase called the quark and the jaguar." And he said, "That's, for me, the image of simplicity and complexity. Can I use that as the title to my book?" And I said, "Sure, absolutely." And so that's how his book got that title, The Quark and the Jaguar. And here's my poem in 6 sections. The leaves of a dream are the leaves of an onion. Red oak leaves rustle in the wind. Inside a dream, You dream the leaves scattered on dirt and feel it as an instance of the chance configuration to your life. All night you feel red horses galloping in your blood, hear a piercing siren, and are in love with the inexplicable. You walk to your car, find the hazard lights blinking, find a rust brown knife, a trout, a smashed violin in your hands. And then you wake inside the dream to find tangerines ripening in the silence. You peel the leaves of the dream as you would peel the leaves off an onion. The layers of the dream have no core, no essence. You find the tattoo of a red scorpion on your body. You simply laugh, shiver in the frost, and step back into the world. A Galapagos turtle has nothing to do with the world of the neutrino. The ecology of the Galapagos Islands has nothing to do with a pair of scissors. The cactus by the window has nothing to do with the invention of the wheel. The invention of the telescope has nothing to do with the red jaguar. No, the invention of the scissors has everything to do with the invention of the telescope. A map of the world has everything to do with a cactus by the window. The world of the quark has everything to do with a jaguar circling in the night. The man who sacrifices himself and throws a Molotov cocktail at a tank has everything to do with a sunflower that bends to the light. Open a window and touch the sun, or feel the wet maple leaves flicker in the rain. Watch a blue crab scuttle in clear water, or find a starfish in the dirt. Describe the color green to the color blind, or build a house out of pain. The world is more than you surmise. Take the pines, green-black, slashed by light, etched by wind, on the island across the riptide body of water. Describe the 1,000 iridescent needles to a blind albino tarahumara. In a bubble chamber, in a magnetic field, an electron spirals and spirals into the center. But the world is more than such a dance, a spiraling into the point of origin, a spiraling out in the form of a wet leaf, a blue crab, or a green house. The heat ripples the cactus. Crushed green glass in a parking lot, or a pile of rhinoceros bones gives off heat, though you might not notice it. The heat of a star can be measured under a spectrometer, but not the heat of the mind or the heat of Angkor Wat. And the rubble of Angkor Wat gives off heat. So do apricot blossoms in the night, green fish, black bamboo, or a fisherman fishing in the snow. And an angstrom of shift turns the pleasure into pain. The ice that rips the fingerprint off your hand gives off heat, and so does each moment of existence. A red leaf disintegrating in the dirt burns with the heat of an acetylene flame, and the heat rippling off the tin roof of the adobe house is simply the heat you see. What is the secret to a Guarneri violin? Wool dipped in an indigo bath turns bluer when it oxidizes in the air. Marat is changed in the minds of the living. A shot of tequila is related to Antarctica shrinking. A crow in a bar or red snapper on ice is related to the 12-tone method of composition. And what does the tuning of timpani have to do with the smell of your hair? To feel at 30 you have come this far. To see a bell over a door as a bell over a door. To feel the care and precision of this violin is no mistake, nor is the sincerity and shudder of passion by which you live. Crush an apple, crush a possibility. No single method can describe the world. Therein is the pleasure of chaos, of leaps in the mind. A man slumped over a desk in an attorney's office is a parrotfish caught in a seaweed mass. A man who turns to the conversation in a bar is a bluefish hooked on a cigarette. Is the desire and collapse of desire in an unemployed carpenter, the instinct of salmon to leap upstream? The smell of eucalyptus can be incorporated into a theory of aggression. The pattern of interference in a hologram replicates the apple, knife, horse tails on the table, but misses the sense of chaos, distorts in its singular view. Then touch, shine, dance, sing, be, becoming, be. In 1969 to 1970, when I was here at MIT, there was a very small but wonderful humanities department. And it wasn't just working with Denise Levertov, but I want to say that I'm trying to remember some of the professors and classes. There was a wonderful professor named George Bornstein who went on to teach at the University of Michigan, and he recently retired from there. But I had a freshman class that was just a survey of literature, and I really liked Yeats's poetry, and he was teaching a seminar for juniors and seniors, and I talked to him, and he said, oh, well, you should just take my class. So my sophomore year at MIT, I was in a Yeats seminar, I was in an Eliot seminar. There was a professor who went on to Brandeis, Eugene Goodhart, and he taught a class in Shakespearean tragedy. I also cross-registered at Harvard and took 2 classes there, so I was taking the bus back and forth on Mass Ave. So I was sort of a magpie creating or finding my own way. But it was actually a very exciting time, and I remember reading Chaucer here, actually, with a professor named Roy Lamson, who taught us how to read in Middle English. And the sounds and rhythms of Chaucer were really beautiful and wonderful. And so those were all important to me. Here, I'm coming back to, here's a poem said in Santa Fe, New Mexico. First, snow. A rabbit has stopped on the gravel driveway. Imbibing the silence, you stare at spruce needles. There's no sound of a leaf blower, no sign of a black bear. A few weeks ago, a buck scraped his rack against an aspen trunk. A carpenter scribed a plank along a curved stone wall. You only spot the rabbit's ears and tail. When it moves, you locate it against speckled gravel. But when it stops, it blends in again. The world of being is like this gravel. You think you own a car, a house, this blue zigzagged shirt, but you just borrow these things. Yesterday, you constructed an aqueduct of dreams and stood at Gibraltar, but you possess nothing. Snow melts into a pool of clear water, and in this stillness, starlight behind daylight, wherever you gaze. Thank you. This next poem is in an invented form. I mentioned writing poems in one-line stanzas that I think of as monostichs or microcosms. And I think of poetry as the most intense and also musical form of language. And I have a poem called Here, and actually the very first poem I read, Anvil, starts each line with the word when until the very end. And at a certain stage, I asked myself, what would happen? I sort of like secrets to poems, I guess. It's a way of pushing me to invent and do things I haven't done before. I asked myself, what would happen if I had this secret stricture and just, to see what would happen if each line had to pick up a word or words from the previous line. So unlike starting, say, each line of a poem with the word here, I might have the word now in one line, and I might pull the word no out of the word now into the next line of a poem. I might repeat something as simple as the or I might take something like plutonium and repeat it. But the title would lead into the first line, and the last line would lead back to the title. So it's sort of my obsession with line and circle. Sometimes I think there's the illusion of progress, and actually we're circling back without realizing it. This poem is set in the fields of northern New Mexico. I lived in the Pojoaque Valley for about 15 years. And if you walk in that landscape, it's high desert country. But if you look west on the mesas, you'll see the water tower of Los Alamos. And even in the most beautiful landscapes in New Mexico, I always think of the haunted history, Trinity Site, Los Alamos, the weapons, the research, the birth of the atom bomb. And then I started to think about how New Mexico was sort of outside of the America or the original America until the Louisiana Purchase. And the idea of Jefferson and American history came into view. So this poem is called Sightlines. I'm walking in sight of the Rio Nambe. Salt cedar rises through silt in an irrigation ditch. The snowpack in the Sangre de Cristos has already dwindled before spring. At least no fires erupt in the conifers above Los Alamos. The plutonium waste has been hauled to an underground site. A man who built plutonium triggers breeds horses now. No one could anticipate this distance from Monticello. Jefferson despised newspapers, but no one thing takes us out of ourselves. During the Cultural Revolution, a boy saw his mother shot by a firing squad. A woman detonates when a spam text triggers bombs strapped to her body. When I come to an upright circular steel lid, I step out of the ditch. I step out of the ditch, but step deeper into myself. I arrive at a space that no longer needs autumn or spring. I find ginseng where there is no ginseng, my talisman of desire. Though you are visiting Paris, you are here at my fingertips. Though I step back into the ditch, no whitening cloud dispels this world's mystery. The ditch ran before the year of the Louisiana Purchase. I'm walking on silt, glimpsing horses in the field, fielding the shapes of our bodies in white sand, though parallel lines touch in the infinite is here. When I was a student here at MIT, Chloe asked me what dorm I was in. It was called Burton 4. I don't know if that still exists. Maybe it does. And 4 referred to the 4th floor. So it was sort of like its own separate community, even though it was part of a huge dorm. It was like each floor had their own identity. And because 1969, 1970 was the Vietnam War, there was a lot of social protest. I wasn't alone in sort of looking at just beyond the sort of focus of science, of hard science and mathematics. And I'm thinking of when I became US Poet Laureate, I suddenly got these emails from classmates I had not heard from since 1970. So that was pretty astonishing. And one classmate is now a professor of sociology at Columbia University. Another is a professor of medicine at Stanford University. My roommate became a city planner for the city of Alameda in California. And another classmate, George Rutherglen, was a year ahead of me. And I remember taking an introduction to philosophy class here at MIT and always being startled at the way that philosophers sort of looked at the world and with language. And I oftentimes would be puzzling over Plato and talking to George Rutherglen in the dorm in Burton. And he also ended up at Berkeley. He was at Berkeley Bolt Law School. He was a year ahead of me. And we used to meet in Berkeley just over some beers and talk about philosophy. And he was the student who introduced me to Wallace Stevens, who became, someone said to me, he's the American poet I quote most often in interviews. And that idea of philosophical inquiry really came out of just students hanging out in the dorm and by puzzling over philosophy texts. So again, it's sort of another seed that started here at MIT and came to fruition many years later. I think I'm going to read one last poem, but it's also a sequence. I wanted to read many different kinds of poems. And let me see. It's called Streamers, and it's also in 6 sections. Here it is. In the last section, there's the word enzo, which is Japanese, and it references the idea of a circle. And in Zen Buddhism, there's a whole tradition of Zen masters drawing a circle in one continuous motion or fracturing it and dividing it into 2. And then there's a tradition of Zen monks drawing the circle, the idea of the infinite, beginningless beginning, endless end, and then writing cryptic messages. So, and I'm coming back to string theory here because Hakuin, one of the Zen masters, drew the Zen enzo and he wrote, "No space in the 10 directions, not 1 inch of great earth." And people have been like, what does that mean? And that's one of your koans to sort of ponder the riddle of existence. So here's my last poem. It's in 6 sections. So hang in there. Streamers. As an archaeologist unearths a mask with opercular teeth and abalone eyes, someone throws a broken fan and extension cords into a dumpster A point of coincidence exists in the mind resembling the tension between a denotation and its stretch of definition. Aurora, a luminous phenomenon consisting of streamers or arches of light appearing in the upper atmosphere of a planet's polar regions, caused by the emission of light from atoms excited by electrons accelerated along the planet's magnetic field lines, the mind's magnetic field lines. When the red shimmering in the huge dome of sky stops, a violet flare is already arcing up and across, while a man foraging a dumpster in Cleveland finds some celery and charred fat. Hunger, angst, the blue shimmer of emotion, water speeding through a canyon, to see only to know, to wake finding a lug nut, ticket stub, string, personal card, ink smear, $2.76. A quacudal wooden dish with a double-headed wolf is missing from a museum collection. And as the director checks to see if it was deaccessioned, a man sitting on a stool under bright lights shouts. A pachinko ball dropped vertiginously but struck a chiming ring and ricocheted to the left. We had no sense that a peony was opening, that 1,000 white buds of a Kyoto camellia had opened at dusk and had closed at dawn. When the man steps out of the pachinko parlor, he will find himself vertiginously dropping in starless space. When he discovers that his daughter was cooking over smoking oil and shrieked in a fatal asthma attack, he will walk the bright streets in an implosion of grief. His mind will become an imploding star. He will know he is searching among bright gold threads for a black pattern in the weave. Set a string loop into a figure of 2 diamonds, 4 diamonds, 1 diamond. As a woman tightens her hand into a fist and rubs it in a circular motion over her heart, a bewildered man considering the semantics of set decides no through line exists. To sink the head of a nail below the surface, to fix as a distinguishing imprint, sign, or appearance, to incite, put on a fine edge by grinding, to adjust, adorn, put in motion, make unyielding, to bend slightly the tooth points of a saw alternately in opposite directions. As the woman using her index finger makes spiral after spiral from her aorta up over her head, see the possibilities for transcendence. You have to die and die in your mind before you can begin to see the empty spaces the configuration of string defines. A restorer examines the pieces of a tin chandelier and notices the breaks in the arms are along old solder lines and that cheap epoxy was used. He will have to scrape off the epoxy, scrub some flux, heat up the chandelier, and use a proper solder. A pair of rough-legged hawks are circling over a pasture. One hawk cuts off the rabbit's path of retreat, while the other swoops with sharp angle and curve of wings. Cirrus, cirrostratus, cirrocumulus, altostratus, altocumulus, stratocumulus, nimbostratus, cumulus, cumulonimbus stratus. Is there no end? Memories stored in the body begin to glow. A woman seals basil in brown bags and hangs them from the ceiling. A dead sturgeon washes to shore. The sun is at the horizon, but another sun is rippling in water. It's not that the angle of reflection equals the angle of incidence, but there's exultation, pleasure, distress, death, love. The world resembles a cuttlefish changing colors and shimmering. An apprentice archer has stretched the bowstring properly, but does not know he will miss the target because he is not aiming in the hips. He will learn to hit the target without aiming when he has died in his mind. I am not scared of death, though I am appalled at how obsession with security yields a pin-pushing, pencil-shaving existence. You can descend to the swimming level of sharks, be a giant kelp growing from the ocean bottom up to the surface light. But the critical moment is to die feeling the infinite stillness of the passions, to revel in the touch of hips, hair, lips, hands, feel the collapse of space in December light. When I know I am no longer trying to know the spectral lines of the earth, I can point to a cuttlefish and say, here it is sepia, already it is deep brown, and exult, here it is deep brown, already it is white. Red koi swim toward us, and black carp are rising out of the depths of the pond. But our sustenance is a laugh, a grief, a walk at night in the snow, seeing the pure gold of a flickering candle. A moment at dusk when we see that deer have been staring at us. We did not see them edge out of the brush. A moment when someone turns on a light and turns a window into a mirror. A moment when a child asks, when will it be tomorrow? To say a bell cannot be red and violet at the same place and time because of the logical structure of color is true, but is a dot that must enlarge into a zero, a void, enzo, red shimmer, breath, endless beginning, pure body, pure mind. Thank you. Stop here.